The real reason you're stuck isn't laziness, and it's not lack of motivation. It's how fast you decide, or more accurately, how slow. Most people think their bottleneck is execution, but the actual drain is the gap between I should do something and I'm doing it. Every decision you sit on burns mental energy and kills momentum before you've even started. We're covering a rule that gives you a clear threshold for when you know enough to act. No more research that goes nowhere. No more stalling dressed up as strategy. By the end, you'll have a system that keeps things moving, and you'll recognize the label most people slap on this problem to make it sound like a personality trait instead of a habit. That label is perfectionist, and it's worth looking at directly. Have you ever called yourself one? Because here's the thing. Every single person who's still sitting on a half-finished project says the exact same thing. Every one of them, it's basically the official mascot phrase of people who haven't shipped anything in 6 months. So let's talk about what perfectionism actually looks like day to day. It's 23 browser tabs open because you needed just a little more research. It's the third draft of a plan that nobody asked you to rewrite. It's the project that keeps getting refined, restructured, and reorganized, but never actually launched. The work exists, sure. It's just always one more tweak away from being ready. And that one more tweak has been one more tweak for about 4 months now. Here's where it gets interesting. Perfectionism doesn't actually make the work better. It just makes the wait longer. The real gap in quality between pretty good and perfect is almost nothing. Most people on the receiving end of your work can't even see the difference. But the time gap? That's enormous. You're spending weeks, sometimes months, chasing an improvement that delivers almost zero extra value to anyone. And the reason it's so hard to catch yourself doing this is because perfectionism feels productive. You're still moving, still thinking, still doing something. But here's the distinction that matters. Motion isn't progress. Most productivity systems are built around execution speed, how fast you work, how much you output. But that's not actually where most people lose time. The real bottleneck is decision timing. It's the gap between knowing enough and acting on it. Over-researching doesn't sharpen your thinking. It stalls your projects and drains the mental energy you actually need to move forward. Think about a car idling in a driveway. Engines running, fuel's burning, everything sounds like it's working. But you're not going anywhere. That's perfectionism from the outside. Lots of noise, lots of effort, zero movement down the road. And the whole time the engine is running, you're burning through something you can't get back. The real cost isn't just the hours you spend tweaking. It's bigger than that. It's every decision you put off because the project isn't ready yet. It's the momentum you never build because you never get the feedback that only comes from actually launching something. And it's the mental bandwidth you burn, keeping everything in this permanent, not ready yet state. Because that stuff lives in your head, rent-free until you ship it or kill it. Now, here's the part most people don't want to hear. Calling yourself a perfectionist is a shield. It protects you from the discomfort of putting something out before it feels completely safe. And that means it's not really a work style. It's a stall tactic with better branding. I'm a perfectionist sounds like a strength, but in practice it functions exactly like avoidance, just with a nicer outfit on. Because the real issue isn't that perfectionists care more than everyone else. It's that they've built a system that requires certainty before action. And certainty almost never comes. There's always one more variable you don't know yet, one more scenario you haven't planned for, one more thing that could theoretically go wrong. So the work sits, and the window, where it would have mattered, starts to close. So here's the direct challenge. If your high standards have never actually shipped anything, they're not high standards. They're excuses dressed up in a blazer. Real standards produce real output. They have a track record. They have a body of work behind them. I only put out my best doesn't mean anything if your best has been sitting in a Google Doc for 8 months with no published date in sight. The fix isn't lowering your standards. It's knowing exactly when you have enough to act. And there's a specific mathematical threshold that separates guessing from stagnating. That's what we're getting into next. It has a specific number attached to it, two numbers actually, and they draw a clear line between moving too fast and stalling out completely. It's called the 40-70 rule. Here's the breakdown. When you have less than 40% of the information you need, you're in impulsive territory. You don't know the basic shape of the problem yet. You haven't looked at the obvious options, and you're running on vibes. That's not bold decision-making. That's reckless. On the other end, when you push past 70%, when you've read everything, made the pros and cons list 3 times, asked 5 different people, and you're still not moving, that's not being thorough. That's analysis paralysis wearing a productivity costume. And every hour you spend past that threshold is time waste, not due diligence. The window between 40 and 70 is where decisions should happen. That's the zone. Most people never find that zone because they go one of two ways. Either they jump way too early, pure gut, zero data, just vibing, or they wait so long that the decision basically makes itself because the window to act has already closed. One more article, one more spreadsheet, one more conversation, and they're convinced that this next piece of information will finally make the call obvious. It won't. It never does. So let's define what being under 40% actually looks like in practice. You can't describe the problem in plain terms yet. You haven't looked at the most obvious solutions. You're working from a feeling, not even a rough read of the situation. Acting here isn't confidence. It's just noise. You'll make a call, sure, but it won't be a real one because it wasn't built on anything. Now flip it. What does pushing past 70% look like? You've done the research. You know the options. You've stress-tested it mentally, talked it through with people you trust, and you can judge the speed and the risk clearly. And you're still sitting on it, still waiting for that one extra data point that's going to make everything feel certain. Here's the problem, that certainty isn't coming. Perfect information is an illusion. It doesn't exist in real decisions, and waiting for it doesn't make you careful. It just makes you late. This rule came out of military leadership and high-stakes planning environments, places where waiting for full information doesn't just slow you down, it costs you the window to act entirely. The logic is simple. A real decision made now beats a perfect decision made never. And that same logic applies to your inbox, your business, your side project that's been almost ready for 3 months. Think about merging onto a highway. You don't sit at the on-ramp waiting until you can see every car for a full mile in both directions. You check the gap, you judge the speed, and you go. Waiting for perfect visibility means you never merge. You just sit there with your blinker on while everyone else moves. That's what over-researching looks like from the outside. And here's the part that makes it so hard to catch. Researching feels good. Your brain gets a dopamine hit from gathering data, from feeling productive, so it doesn't register as stalling. But if no decision comes out the other end of all that research, it's functionally the same as doing nothing, just with more browser tabs open. And the mental energy you burn staying in that loop is energy you can't use for the actual work. The 40-70 rule forces you to define a threshold. It takes the vague feeling of, I need to know more, and replaces it with an actual standard. Once you're in that window, you have enough. Not everything. Enough. And enough, acted on now, builds more real momentum than perfect ever will. Knowing when to decide is one thing, but what you decide with, whether that's raw instinct or something more reliable, that's a different question entirely. Most people treat trust your gut as the alternative to research. It's not. The real distinction is between a raw gut call and what you'd call an informed gut decision, and that gap matters more than most people realize. A pure gut call is zero data, all instinct. You feel something, you go with it, and you hope it works out. An informed gut decision is different. It's what happens when you've done enough work to give your instincts something real to work with. Your gut isn't running blind. It's running on a foundation you built. And specifically, it's what happens when you operate inside that 40 to 70% window. You've gathered enough to see the shape of the problem, you've spotted the key variables, and now your pattern recognition can close the gap without you having to keep feeding it more data. Most people treat this as a binary choice. Either you research everything to death, or you wing it completely. But that's a false choice. The informed gut lives right in the middle, and it's actually the fastest, most reliable decision tool you have. It's not about picking a side. It's about feeding the right inputs into your decision engine so it can close the gap quickly, and then getting out of the research loop before it starts costing you. Here's what an informed gut decision actually looks like in practice. You've scanned the main options. You've spotted the key variables, the things that would actually change your call if they went a different way. You've identified the obvious risks. And then, instead of keep digging, you let your pattern recognition do the rest. That's not guessing. That's efficient. You did the work, and now you let your brain finish the job. Contrast that with a pure impulse call. A gut decision with no real information behind it is just a coin flip you feel confident about. Sometimes it works. But it's not a system. It's luck. And luck doesn't scale. You can't build a track record on luck, and you can't improve it over time. Here's the key takeaway on this. When your instincts are fed real data, even partial data, they get faster and more accurate over time. Every informed decision you make is a rep, and reps build capability. That's your real ROI on the time you spend researching. Not the extra certainty, but the sharper instincts you're building for the next call. That's where the compounding angle comes in. Every time you make an informed gut call, and it works, you're building a faster decision engine. Your pattern recognition gets sharper. Your threshold for "I know enough" gets more calibrated. But every time you stall, every time you sit on a decision, waiting for one more data point, you're not just losing time. You're adding cognitive clutter. That project stays open in your head, burning bandwidth, creating mental setup costs every time you come back to it. And that drag slows everything else down too, including the projects that are actually profitable. Think about a mechanic who's worked on 1,000 engines. They can listen to a car run for 30 seconds and tell you exactly what's wrong. That's pattern recognition built on real experience. The informed gut works exactly the same way. The more real decisions you make with real data behind them, the faster and sharper that instinct becomes. So the goal isn't to feel completely certain before you act. Certainty is the wrong target. The real goal is to act with enough information that your decision is defensible. To yourself, if nobody else. You can explain why you moved. You can point to what you knew and what you weighed. That's the threshold. And once you can do that, the only thing left is to actually make the call. Because perfectionism, over-researching, and stalling all feel like different problems. But underneath, they're all the same move. The 40-70 rule gives you a real line to cross. So here's what you do right now. Pick one decision you've been sitting on. If you're in that 40-70 window, make the call today, not later. Today. Then implement the one-touch rule. Whatever small task that decision opens up, finish it in one go. Don't revisit it. And if you don't have a big block of time, use the Swiss cheese method. Poke one small hole in it. Write one paragraph. Open the document. 5 minutes counts. These tools are built for fragmented schedules, and they turn small actions into real momentum. Subscribe for more actionable strategies on how to manage your time.